Okay, we're a little after 6 o'clock, so we'll go ahead and get started. We'll call the Johnston City Council Work Session number 23-17 to order. Sam, roll call, please.
Martin,
Here.
Burkhart,
Here.
Reddy,
Here.
Evans,
Here.
Cope.
We are still missing one individual for the first two items on the agenda, so we're going to skip down to the third item on the agenda, and that is the Central Iowa Water Works financial observations and considerations of joining CIWW. Matt?
Good evening, Mayor and Council. My name is Matt Stuffel with PFM Financial Advisors. We are the municipal advisor for the city.
Matt, you're going to need to talk into the mic a little better.
Okay. Okay, so I think we prepared some slides. We've been here, several times over the past couple of years. Can you hear better with this?
Not much.
How about now?
Yeah.
Okay.
Is that better?
So most recently, we were here in August. I was here in August, and we were kind of talking through the observations and considerations at that time. And if you want to pull up the slide deck, but mainly I'm here for your questions. I'm going to go through this relatively quickly, 10 minutes or so, just kind of give the highlights of what's changed. And then I know Mike and I have talked at some length. I know you've probably had some internal discussions regarding a lot of this stuff. And so really just here to answer any questions and to give the council an opportunity to kind of talk amongst themselves about this very important decision that's going to be coming down. So. Okay, so the first thing is the timeline, and that's on slide 2. But the timeline, this was sent out in September 15th, and this timeline is relatively fluid in the sense that there's 12 communities still considering the 2080, and so this has to fit each of the member communities' kind of own approval timeline. And so this is what is essentially kind of outlined. If you go to the next slide, slide 3, they're really looking to have a final execution version of the 2080 yet this year. On this timeline, you can see that they were hoping to have that by October 31st. Really the biggest thing that's holding that execution version up is first of all, really a resolution of intent of who is participating for certain. And then once the communities that's determined that they're participating for certain, then the first big expansion is the Saylorville expansion. And of the communities, which communities would like to participate in that expansion? And there's some tables within the 2080 that essentially tie to the financials of if this is a $160 million expansion, who's participating at what level, and then that will flow into the financials in terms of what it will cost to join Central Iowa Water Works. So that's kind of the last piece that we're waiting on, and they've asked that communities communicate that level of intent to participate in Saylorville by November 15th. And then I'll update the numbers. I'll have final tables by November 20th that will get reviewed by various parties. And then that will be the execution version that then the cities will then probably entertain, at the end of calendar 2023 or at the beginning of 2024.
So if I can just interject too, we received the resolution on October 16th, I believe, which would have been after our last council meeting. And so we've had communications with Des Moines Water Works because this would have been the only meeting from when we received it to when we could approve it. And I said, I have a little bit of concern. Sometimes council wants a little bit of time to digest decisions like this. So they have said for us that we could communicate. We have our next meeting on October 20th. So if we don't approve the resolution, which is on the regular agenda this evening, we would have until the 20th and would have to communicate by the 21st our intentions. So just that curveball. And I think it's us and Waukee, they've kind of said can do that. So
that's the timeline. And so the commencement of Central Iowa Water Works is still the January 1st of 2025. So you would pay Des Moines Water Works for your water, assuming you join Central Iowa Water Works, you would continue to pay Des Moines Water Works for your water through December 31st, 2024. And then as of January 1st, 2025, then you would start to pay Central Iowa Water Works and you would be allocated a portion of the budget. I mean, we'll go through a little bit more of that. But so as you plan for your fiscal 25 budget, which is upcoming, Central Iowa Water Works would factor into your 2025 budgeting process if this timeline kind of follows course. So, so the next slide. And as far as I'm concerned, this table out of the 2080 is the table that is the most important for the long term. And this is just the allocation of costs for Central Iowa Water Works, how the costs will be allocated, and then how they will be collected to the communities. And this has been vetted, over several years. I think this is a very fair and equitable way for Central Iowa to recover the costs. This has been, PFM has weighed in on this. Raftelis, who is a rate consultant, has weighed in on this. FCS has weighed in on this. So really 3 national, highly regarded consultants have kind of weighed in on this allocation of cost. And it's really the backbone of the financial implications of this. And so, so that's there. It hasn't really changed much. It's tweaked a little bit, but hasn't really changed much since the original 2080 has come out. And so I think that's kind of the executive level. That's how costs will be allocated moving forward. And I don't see this table changing for probably ever, to be honest. I mean, if there is a fundamental change to how costs are incurred, something that was unanticipated, but otherwise I think this could stand the test of time.
Is this rate principles applicable to each city or each participant in the Central Iowa Water Works? Or is there a different schedule for different?
Tom, can
Yep,
you
this is,
switch on the mic?
Sorry.
yes, I think your question is does this change by participating community? And it doesn't. And one thing that makes this a fair and equitable is that the base cost and the extra capacity cost are exactly the same per unit of measurement for whoever is participating. And then it just depends on what's your max day demand, what's your average day demand, how many gallons are you buying? Everybody's paying the same rate. What's your maximum day? And that's what's being charged to everybody's maximum day. It's a uniform rate across the board. So it's what kind of underpins the integrity, I think, of the model. So the next slide, slide 5, these are the revenue projections, and these continue to change based on, the most updated information we can get from Des Moines and West Des Moines on producers. But I know this is really hard to see, but if you look at the very bottom, gives you a sense of, when this agency starts out, it's going to be collecting about $60 million or $70 million. And then by the time you get to year 5, which is when the Saylorville expansions are on, it's going to be approaching a $90 million annual budget. And so if you think about the WRA or Metro Waste Authority, those are in the $50 million budget. So this is about, not quite 2 times as big as WRA or Metro Waste Authority, but, it gives you a sense of the size of the agency. And then, these are all of the different cost categories broken out by how then they're allocated to the various communities. So this is the budget for the CIWW in total. So then the next slide. This is really Johnston's allocation. So the way you'll pay cost in the future, everybody will pay the $2.21 per thousand. And for you, that equates to about $1.8 million or 1,781,000. And then everybody will pay the $228 per max day demand. And so that's where you're at the 5.009. So that'll be about $1.1 million. And then the next two groups are really dependent on your participation in Saylorville. And so these numbers were done assuming everybody's going to participate at the same level. There are still a few communities that are deciding how much of Saylorville they want to participate in. And so these numbers will change once those tables are finalized. But then, the way you'll pay your cost is if in line 19 and 20, you'll pay your variable cost or your base cost based on a per thousand. So depending on how much water you buy, you'll pay the $2.21 per thousand. But then you'll pay the fixed cost per month for the extra capacity cost and any expansion cost that you have. And so unlike right now where you pay Des Moines Waterworks a variable cost for all of your cost, you'll have more of a fixed cost and then a smaller variable cost. So you'll have a bigger margin on your water that you sell monthly, but you're going to have to cover a lot more of your base cost, whether you sell water or not. And we've talked about this in the past. I think Johnston has a relatively good rate structure for this new model, whereas some communities are going to have to completely redo their rate structure. So then the next slide, this just starts to break down the same information, but it gives you a sense of, so now we've got this asset transfer cost. And one thing you'll notice, I've got the asset transfer cost in here based on our current estimates, but I'm really trying to work with Des Moines Waterworks on what are your assets going to be December 31st, 2024. And let's build those into the 2080 because the last version you saw was assets as of 2019. Now this version, you see them as of 2022. And that number just keeps changing and keeps moving. And we need to get closer to what it's actually going to be so that communities can have that. We know it's not going to be exact or perfect, but let's get a lot closer to where we think where it's going to end up. And so that's one of the things that in this next version that we're trying to pin down in a way that's digestible for all the communities to really understand what assets are being listed, what values are they at, and just a better understanding of that. So, and then the other big thing that changed really since this spring was the SRF rates I had built in at 3%, which was 100 basis points over what they currently were at. And right now, based on current market, they went from 2% to 3.09, and now we've got them built in at 4.4%. So that cost of financing has just continued to compound, and you've seen that compound on the Saylorville project in the CIWW model, and then on the asset transfer. If Johnston needs to borrow $10 million to fund the asset transfer, the cost of financing that has went up pretty significantly. So when I stood up here last year and earlier this year, and I said, you should see some pretty significant savings going to Central Iowa Waterworks, that savings is really starting to narrow, and it's almost, it's not quite break even, but it's right at about I still don't think Johnston will see a rate shock from joining Central Iowa Waterworks. You're not going to pay a lot more, but man, that delta that I had been measuring is starting to shrink to almost zero, depending on what assumptions that we use on the out years. So, it is what it is. I try to be relatively conservative on the interest rates, but not excessively conservative to overstate the numbers. And so I hope that we're at the top of the interest rate environment, and it's going to kind of come back down from here, but, you know,
So Matt, is it primarily the interest rates that's driving that increased cost?
you know, and then the asset transfer cost itself has went up, you know, so they've been adding assets quicker than they've been depreciating, so the cost of that asset transfer has went up. So it's probably 60% interest rates, 40% them moving the number. And we know that they're going to add more assets. They're going to add in 23 and in 24. So we're trying to pin that down so we got a better number. So you won't for sure lock these in until the way it'll work is they have to give you a number by mid 2025. What is the cost to Johnston for the asset transfer? And then you've got a year to finance that. And so, you know, you'll know your number. We'll be able to look at your cash flow and say, how much can we pay with cash? How much do we need to borrow? What's the borrowing rate? Do we want to use GO bonds or do we want to use SRF rates? You know, we'll work through all of that sometime in 2025. And we really won't know the cost of joining that until we lock in the financing and we know what the interest rate is for that. So,
Matt, can you just spell out, I mean, 40% is a pretty significant chunk being allocated to the assets that they're transferring in.
yep.
So can you be a little bit more specific about what those assets are?
Yeah, it's all of Saylorville. I mean, it's all of the water producing assets throughout the Des Moines Metro. So Saylorville, McMullen,
So transferring them from
Fluor
Des Moines
Drive.
Waterworks to Central Iowa Waterworks, that's the asset transfer?
that's the asset transfer. All of the water producing assets, the Grimes facilities they're all going into the middle. And then Johnston saying, we're purchasing 5% or 6% of all of the assets. So you're kind of purchasing a portion of all of those water producing assets. And right now, and we'll get to this in a minute, but right now, you don't have you haven't bought any of those assets, you know, outright the first time. And even the purchase capacity customers are having to convert their option contract or their purchase capacity contract from a lease. You know, they have an option to purchase cheaper water through 2045. They've got to convert that to ownership. So even Urbandale has they've bought a lot of purchase capacity in the past, but that's not true ownership. That they still have to convert that to ownership through Central Iowa Waterworks. And so there's a whole section of this 28E that's called the asset transfer. I think it might be 12, section 12, schedule 12, but it kind of goes through all of the math on, you know, and the assets went from 157 million to 189 million. And that's the amount that I'm saying is the 40% increase in your cost was because the assets became more valuable because they put money into them faster than they depreciated it. Does that help?
Yeah, I mean, I was trying to sort of,
Yep.
was it a decision that was a rational decision that benefits all, or was it a decision that benefited some or few? And it sounds like based on your description, it was a rational decision that benefited all.
Yeah.
Okay, and that was just what I was trying to,
Yeah, it's
kind of, I
just-
mean, 40% is pretty significant, and just to kind of understand.
Yeah, it's just saying that they're increasing the value of the assets because they're investing in them at a faster rate than they're depreciating them from a book value perspective.
Matt, what is the depreciation rate, or is it fluid depending on the asset?
It is. It ranges from 85 years to 5 years. So it's really based on the useful life of the asset. You know, what exactly is the asset? What was the book value and what was the useful life when it was established? So it's about probably 2,000 lines long and it calls out the various assets.
Are there those who have assets right now, is there any moratorium as far as no further improvements or additive value to those without some sort of more universal approval? In other words, I'm beginning to struggle as to why we're having these huge chunks of increases in value. In my simpleton mind, we should know how much this asset cost when they built it, or even as they had to finance it, and they can divide it by whatever that depreciation is in the number of years that have passed. Why did we jump $30 million? Why are we anticipated to probably have more if we're not using, why can't we get fresh numbers?
Yeah, and I think it's more of the as of date. So they were using an as of 2019 date and they just hadn't got around to updating it. And then we pushed them to update it. So then they did, the most recent audit was 2022. They have a capital plan. It's been approved. They have a good sense of what and that's why we're trying to push them to let's get a closer as of. So the tech committee has been meeting. There's been a technical advisory committee that's been meeting for some time. At any time Des Moines tries to bring a project forward, they're presenting it to this group. The group is discussing it. There's inputs from all of the communities. And so they're trying to formalize that process. But this number is an important number because it's a check that the city of Johnston is going to have to write eventually. And so we're trying to get as good of an estimate in the execution version of the 28E so that when we get to actually having to write that check, we don't have to go back and explain why it's $3 million more than what we thought it was going to be. And it's been a hard number to pin down just because of the complexities of the assets. So,
We've certainly, from staff's perspective, raised this exact concern, and I think just with financing, it certainly, like Matt says, it is complex. We can't give you the answer until that date, January 1 of 2025 comes. It's some of the things we've talked conceptually with them is, put some type of cap in there or limiter, so that people have more comfort, because frankly, we don't want to have a blank check either.
Matt, in fact, did I hear you say that date won't be January 1st, 2025, even with the valuation? Is
the as of date, the value of the assets on January 1, 2025, that's what the communities are agreeing to buy.
okay.
A lot of times the audits aren't done for 6 months, and so they need the auditors to go through the depreciation schedules and all of the things that go into an audit to determine what was the actual audited value going back to that January 1, 2025. So you might not know it until July of 25, but it's going to be as of January 1, 2025.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so I know, looks like you're first and
Our
second.
attorney has arrived.
Your attorney is here. So this snapshot is just the cash flow that the council saw back in the spring when we set your rates for this upcoming year. And it's really the line 30 that I'm kind of trying to hone in on, because that's what's building into your cost of water for the future. So you can see it's at $4.57, goes to $4.71, and then it gets out there to $5.46 based on 3% increases each year. So I've tried to take this, and then if you go to the next slide, and really just try to align of like, what do we have in the cash flow now? What does the effective rate potentially look like for Central Iowa Waterworks? What's the difference? The reason there's a ramp up with Central Iowa Waterworks is because the debt comes on in different kind of buckets for Saylorville. So you don't pay principal and interest until the project is complete. It takes 2 years to complete the project. So really that's the big difference between that 369 and that 533 is the Saylorville coming online. So you can see in the first couple of years, I still think it'll be a slight reduction in the rate, but then, it gets up to about very comparable, 20 cents higher, 8 cents higher. And then it just a function of really the rest of it is a function of what we're assuming on your growth. So this is kind of where I've said, in the past, there's been a delta there. It looks like the financial benefit of joining Central Iowa Waterworks has really started to shrink, although, I still think in the future, the allocation of cost to Johnston will be a lot more fair and equitable, because now you're relying on Des Moines to essentially allocate those costs to you fair and equitably. And there's really no mechanism for them to credit you back if they overcharged you. So anyway.
You mean when they overcharged us? I presume that's what you meant to say.
For the last 6 years that they've overcharged you, yes. And maybe longer. But anyway, okay. So then These are high-level things that I just wanted to make sure that you understand. These were based on the 23 budgets for Des Moines and West Des Moines. They're based on the 24 budgets for Grimes and Polk City. Johnston's kind of average demand currently is 3.95. Your max day demand is about 4.89% of the region. Your initial capacity would be about 5% of the region. And then your growth allocation is slightly above that. So you're kind of growing on pace with how big you are. I note here that the asset transfer framework will change based on book values, and we're trying to get them to that book value as of December 31, 2024. The SR rate assumptions there. And then the regional costs, it appears to reduce the rate in the first couple of years, but then be about break even in the out years. And then the last slide is really just, a few items that I know the city is continuing to discuss with the region about concerns that it has with the current version of the 2080, and just, several items that that are still being discussed. And so happy to answer any questions or give it back to Mike to transition to the next item.
Also have any other questions for Matt?
Mayor, I have one. I just want to make sure that I understand this. You kind of alluded to the fact, and you had said we may have overpaid even more than 6 years. So can you elaborate a little bit? It's my understanding that 6 years ago, a different rate computation was done by Des Moines Waterworks. They realized that we were paying a higher amount than what had been agreed. Is that right? And then we went through a kind of freeze of rate increases in our purchase from them at some point in the last 6 years?
They do a cost of service study each year, and I know at least I've seen the data on the past 6 years based on that cost of service study. My comment was more related to, they've probably have other cost of service studies in the past that could show your ratio, but I have not seen those. But the with storage rate, you've certainly been paying a higher rate for a lot longer. But I don't have the data to really kind of extrapolate back even into those 6 years, I didn't do that math.
Yeah, and Des Moines Waterworks changed their methodology about 6 years ago on their cost of service report. So to go back further, at least the methodology on the data that I shared and discussed with Matt, and I've shared with some of you, you really can't go back further unless you really redo the entire cost of service reporting that they did. But certainly in this period, I think what we've presented to Des Moines Waterworks is, let's not go back to the day one, because I think that's a really difficult thing to argue and justify. But, I think our argument originally started with, we didn't have purchase capacity, but we certainly were paying for the debt over the long run. That really has not went anywhere with Des Moines Waterworks. They've really argued, you've leased the asset. It's kind of like a car. If you don't use all the value of your lease at the end of the lease, regardless, you don't have a car. You don't have any value in that car. You return it. That's what they're really arguing with us, is we didn't participate in purchase capacity, and so there is no value in the car anymore. And so what we've kind of changed our argument is, well, okay, we'll set aside that whole argument, but we can show through the cost of service reporting over the last 6 years that we have overpaid. We've overpaid to the tune of about $2 million. We've used some methodology in the CIWW agreement to say, producers should get cost plus 2%. And so when you do that calculation, it works out to about $1.7 million that we were overcharged. Now, counterpoint, Des Moines Waterworks says is, their cost of service is a zero net gain. So when the city of Johnston's overpaying, there's other communities underpaying, because it all nets out. It's not like Des Moines Waterworks has a pot of money that they're gonna go and now be able to cut a check to Johnston. And so I think that's the opposite argument that they have. Certainly, we were not the only ones that were overcharged. Ankeny, case in point, they were purchase capacity. They were showing about 120% over their cost of service. So, there is counterpoints that Des Moines Waterworks has. I think at this point, they're having discussions later in the week on how to proceed, if there's something that Des Moines Waterworks or the larger group can do. I think in the end of the day, it really is probably Des Moines Waterworks that needs to step up. I'm not sure how CIWW in itself would give us a discount, because why did the other agencies we didn't pay the money to them when we were buying the water. It was Des Moines Waterworks. So that's where we're at, and that's how we're working through it right now.
I guess my statement, I hear what you're saying, and I realize, at least what I understand here, is that we don't want to go back to day one, because it would take us a long time to be able to go through the math if we could ever do so. And yet it sounds like we have depreciation going, or potential of 85 years. So consequently, we're going to give credit to some of those folks for their investments more than 6 years back. And yet it sounds like to some extent they're not willing to give us credit even for these 6 years of overpaying. So I follow the logic, don't get me wrong, but I certainly am compelled that I think we need to continue to stand our ground to make sure that we're treated fairly as we join this partnership, if we decide to do so.
Understand. I know we have other things on the work session. I guess we can continue the discussion. I guess, is there any other questions for Matt while he's here before he departs?
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Matt.
Matt.
Thank you, Matt. Appreciate it.
Do you want to add anything to that item? Okay.
We'll talk when we get to the regular agenda on this item. Thank you, Mayor.
We have two other items on the agenda. Both are closed sessions. The first one is a closed session per Iowa Code Section 21.51C to discuss strategy with council matters that are presently in litigation or where litigation is imminent, where its disclosure would be likely to prejudice or disadvantage the position of the governmental body in that litigation. Do we have a motion to go into closed session?
So moved. Second.
I have a motion and a second. Discussion? Sample, please.
Burkhart,
Yes.
Cope,
Yes.
Ready,
Yes.
Evans,
Yes.
Martin.
Motion passed.